Right, okay, so we've done a little bit of the basics of what the numerator is, what the denominator is. We've talked a little bit about equivalent fractions then and how we can find an equivalent fraction and how we can follow a sequence in the numbers to find even more equivalent fractions. What I want to do really quickly before we finish this week is just talk about the new learning on fractions that you are doing. So you're going to be talking about comparing and ordering fractions, putting them in order. You have done a bit on this already. I wanted to cover two different types of fractions with you. So if we look at this first type of fraction, you'll recognise it as a unit fraction. And you'll know it's a unit fraction because the numerator is always going to be 1. So this is saying we've got 1/10, 1/5, 1/2 and 1/8. So these mean very different amounts. And the reason they mean very different amounts is because for this one, I've had to share my pizza or my chocolate bar or whatever it is. I've had to share it amongst 10 equal parts or into 10 equal parts. And I've only got one. So if you think about a piece of cake or a drawing of a cake, this one has been shared into 10 equal parts. You can see that one of those slices is tiny. It's not big enough. Let's look at this one. This is saying that with the cake or the chocolate or the pizza, it's been shared into 5 equal parts. It's a little bit different because this time we haven't had to make our pieces so small. So if I share this and think about what that would look like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this time, if I've got one of those, you can see it is bigger than one of those. So 1/5 is bigger than 1/10. So even though the denominator is a smaller number, it's bigger. That takes some getting your head around. Let's look at this one, 1/2. Well, we know what that looks like. We've split our cake into 2. Or pizza into 2, and we've got all of that. That's a good place to be right now, having half of a pizza or half of a cake. And then we've got this one. This is saying we've cut our cake and we've shared it into eighths. So we've got that would be into 4s, so it's like that. So if I've only got one of these, is that bigger or smaller than one of these? Well, it's the numbers that would tell me actually, because this one is saying I have only got one part when my cake was split into 8 pieces. This one I've only got one part as well, but my cake was split into 10 pieces. That means that each piece was made smaller. It had to be shared into more pieces, so it's smaller. So when we're dealing with unit fractions, it's a tricky one to get your head around, but actually the biggest fraction in our list here is this one, because 1/2 is bigger than any of these other fractions. So if I'm going to put these in order, I start with the smallest denominator, the smallest number as a denominator. Remember, denominator is the bottom number. Numerator is always going to be a 1 with our unit fractions. 1/2 is bigger, so I'm going to order my numbers from biggest to smallest. Okay, remember that, descending order, biggest to smallest, it's going down. Starting with 1/2, that's my biggest one. What's next then? Remembering what I've just said about the smaller the number on the denominators, the bigger it will be if our numerator is 1. So 5 is our next biggest number. So we've got 1/5 is next, then what? 1/10 or 1/8. Hopefully you've made a decision yourselves, and we would say that 1/8 then is bigger than 1/10. That is weird for us to say that something with a 2 in it is bigger than something with a 10 in it. But it's because we need to remember that these are not whole numbers we're talking about. These are parts. This is saying we've got our pizza into 2 parts. This is saying our pizza had to be cut into 10 parts. And we only have one of those 2 or one of the 10. You know that if you've shared something into 10 lots, one of those lots is going to be much, much smaller than if you only had to share that whole part into 2 lots. Okay, so hopefully that does make sense with the unit fractions. It's the denominator that actually tells us how big that part will be. So let's look at this then. These are not unit fractions. These are fractions. They've all got the same denominator though. So this is saying in every case, I have split my cake into 10 equal parts. That's why my denominator is 10. Are you able to put these in order? Let's start with the biggest one, just so that same as what we did here. So let's start with the one that we think is going to give us the biggest slice or the biggest piece. Where do you start? Well, because the denominator is all the same, this time we're not looking at the denominator, we're looking at the numerator. So it's been cut into 10. Here I've got 2 of those tenths. It's not bad, but here I've got 8 of the tenths. That's most of it, isn't it? 8 out of the 10, that's most of it. Here I've got 5 out of the 10. Not bad, not a bad effort. Not as many as 8 though. 5 of those tenths is not as many as 8 of those tenths. And here we've only got 1 of those tenths. So that's going to be the little bit, isn't it? So if I want to find the biggest fraction in my list of fractions here, which one am I going for? I'm going for the biggest number on the numerator. This is saying I've got 8 of those tenths. This is my biggest number. Oopsie, come back. So 8 tenths is my biggest fraction out of this list. My next biggest fraction, so it's the next biggest number on the numerator. So I've got 5 tenths. And then I know that if I've got 2 tenths, that's definitely bigger than only having 1 tenth. Okay, now it is odd because there's so many things to remember with these fractions, but don't worry too much. You will cover all of this again next year. Fractions, you just build on your learning, build on what you know. Just this week, follow the BBC Bite Size daily lessons. There's a little video tutorial that goes with each of them along with the worksheets. Try your best with it, but please don't worry. Just go back to basics. Draw it if you need to. Sometimes it helps to draw a fraction out. Draw it as a circle, so think of it as a pizza or a cake. That really does help sometimes. Okay, good luck with all the work, and I will see you again next week. Bye.